Southwest Florida event this last year had over 15,000 people. So there's a few more of these events coming up in January. The next one's January 5th. So put that on your calendars at FSW. So I'm going to be speaking from a little different angle today. I'm a cardiologist, and I developed an interest in lifestyle medicine, mostly nutrition, a few years ago. And my story was that I see patients every day that are very ill. They have all the typical chronic diseases, which I'm going to review here. And it's frustrating as a physician to see that people continue to have poor lifestyle habits and really don't get better. So we have them on a lot of medications, yet they feel worse, they gain weight, they feel, every time I see them, they are feeling worse rather than better, which is really not what we want. So I started initially getting into more of the nutrition aspect of things about 4 or 5 years ago, and just recently got certified by the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, which incorporates more than just nutrition, and I'll talk about some of those principles. So in addition to being a cardiologist, a couple of years ago I started a company called Vibrant Beat, which was really just a website up until recently, and we now have a parent company called Green Beat, and we're starting a Vibrant Beat Lifestyle Center. So this is going to be a comprehensive place where people can go, get educated on nutrition, on fitness. We're going to have a gym with some trainers. We're going to have a demo kitchen to do cooking classes. So a whole variety of services available. We have a booth over an orange tint over on this side. So if you're interested in getting more information, feel free to stop by. So one of my passions, one of the reasons I got into the nutrition so much is I've always had a passion for cooking, even from a very young age. And my mother's here; she can attest that I was always in the kitchen growing up. So I have a few pictures here. I go on a guy's ski trip every year with my brother-in-law, my dad, and a bunch of other guys. So
you guys got any more of these carpets?
Introducing people on the ski trip, a bunch of guys to plant-based eating. My wife and I, on the top, on the right over there, we recently had an opportunity to go to University of Florida and teach a plant-based cooking class to the medical students there and some of the faculty. And then the bottom picture on your left is a cooking event we did for American Heart Association. So we auctioned off a cooking with a cardiologist evening to raise money, and I worked with Mark Lust, he owns a number of restaurants in town, so we prepared a fun meal for the people who attended. And then the other part came in, just the fitness part. So I've also always been an active person. This past year, I ran my first half marathon. I did one of the Spartan obstacle races. So really, for me, I wanted to incorporate these two passions with my passion for being a cardiologist. And that's how this whole business has evolved. So the slant that I'm going to talk about today is how does plant-based, aside from the ethical and the environmental concerns with eating meat and animal proteins, I want to talk about the health benefits of focusing on the plant-based diet. So when we look at not only a primary care setting, but also in the cardiology setting, we see a lot of the same chronic diseases over and over again. And in fact, about 80 to 90% of what we see are these same diagnoses. So obesity, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. And they really all come down to the same thing, which is poor lifestyle. All of these things can be addressed with adjusting lifestyle. And I'm going to review some of the literature today, which is evidence-based literature, some studies which show that indeed we can reverse many of these diseases. The 10 leading causes of death in our country, so to name the top 2, cancer and heart disease. And I actually just read yesterday that in some countries cancer has now overtaken heart disease as the number 1 and 2 causes of death. But each account for almost a third of the deaths in our country. And I listed some other ones on there: stroke, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, all of which are felt to be heavily lifestyle-related diseases. I'm going to flash some pictures on here too, just some of the different foods that I prepare. So this was a little oatmeal bowl with some homemade hazelnut butter, and then a smoothie bowl. You can get some great smoothie bowls over at Buddha Blend's truck there. All right, so when we look at the risk factors for these common problems, for the heart attacks, for the strokes, the 2 top causes of death in our country, they've done a couple studies trying to sort these things out, and they really come out to stroke, cancer, heart disease. They all have the same basic things, and you'll see me reference these things over and over again. They come down to being overweight or obese, lack of physical activity, smoking. Those are the 3 big ones, and then just a poor diet. And some of the other risk factors are things like high blood pressure, diabetes, emotional wellness. So these are all things that were found to cause heart attacks, to cause strokes. And these are looking at countries around the world. We're looking at somewhere between 30 and 50 countries, and they all were found to have these same risk factors that accounted for about 90% of strokes and heart attacks. Cancer, same four things: tobacco, lack of physical activity, obesity, poor diet. So the World Cancer Fund, you can see, estimated that a third of the cancers could be cut if we just change the lifestyle and fix these four factors. And once again, you're going to memorize all these by the time you leave here. So premature death. So you're looking at heart disease, stroke, cancer, and dying all have the same causes. So what is lifestyle medicine? Lifestyle medicine is taking the principles of diet, so focuses on a whole food plant-based diet, regular exercise, counseling on substance abuse, tobacco and alcohol, adequate sleep, and stress management. So those are really the pillars of lifestyle medicine, where we try to incorporate all of these principles to make a healthier person. One of the things I really like about lifestyle medicine is it's a very evidence-based specialty, and that's what I'm going to review. It is the evidence that's out there, so we can go beyond just telling people eat better, exercise. We can give them specific details and reference specific studies to show that these principles have been proven. So most of the talk today is going to be on nutrition. I could do, if I did a talk on the sleep and the exercise, we'd be here for hours, which I'm sure no one would enjoy. So the general concepts for nutrition with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine is really the whole food plant-based diet. So whole foods, we talk about people reading labels and scanning labels. You shouldn't even have to read a label. So it's eating the entire food that has all the fiber, all the nutrients that you need, and just eating a wide variety of foods. When I talk to my patients about whole food plant-based diet, it's really four things. It's eating more fruits, more vegetables, and I really tell them specifically, try to focus on leafy greens, try to focus on the cruciferous vegetables, which are things like broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage. These have your most nutritional bang for the buck. We also try to have them focus on beans. So legumes are a great source of nutrients, like your magnesium, your zinc, one of the best sources of fiber. And we always get the question about where do you get your protein. So beans have a ton of plant-based protein. Just a cup of lentils has almost 20 grams of protein and 20 grams of fiber. And fiber is vitally important to our health. And most people in our country only get about 15 grams a day, and we should be getting about 40 to 50 grams a day. So that's the principles of the nutrition with American College of Lifestyle Medicine, is to increase the spectrum of phytonutrients by eating a variety of colorful foods, upping the fiber, eating the plant-based protein, and really trying to cut back on things that we know are bad. So cutting back on refined grains, flours, sugars, oils, processed foods. So if you're not eating stuff that comes in a box, you don't even have to worry about that. And then red and processed meat, which I'll talk about some of the studies which discuss the downsides of red and processed meat specifically, but highly associated with cancer. Processed meat is actually a class 1 carcinogen by the World Health Organization. All right, so as far as just populations goes, everyone here heard of the blue zones? Anyone heard of them? So the blue zones are 5 areas around the world that were documented by travel journalist Dan Buettner. And these areas have the longest living population, so people living to their 90s, their 100s, and really living a healthy lifestyle. And they basically live by the principles of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. So they eat diets that are heavily based by plant foods, beans, depending on what part of the world they are. We have Costa Rica, we have Japan, we have Sardinia in Italy, we have the Seventh-day Adventists in California. So whatever is locally available for vegetables and beans, this is what they eat. They tend to have a lot of socialization, so they don't eat in their cars, they sit down with family, they sit down with friends. There's a lot of socialization, and they tend to be more active populations. So those are kind of the model societies that we should all work towards. And I like this. This was from the China study, which is really a landmark book, which talks about the benefits of plant-based diet versus a more traditional animal-based diet that we see in Western society. But one thing you can see in these with the white bars is the incidence of cardiovascular disease and cancer, and you can see the incidence of those things goes down as the consumption of plant-based foods goes up. So as you go from left to right. So if you look at countries like Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, all the way to the right, they have a much lower incidence of cardiovascular disease and cancer. and a much higher intake of plant-based foods. So I'm going to just talk about some specific diseases here. So I'm going to start out with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. These are three of the most common things that we see in the clinic. And then cardiovascular disease in particular, and then we'll talk a little bit about cancer. So this is a very famous, very oftentimes quoted study called the DASH diet. So this study has been around for probably 20 years now. Basically what they showed here was, if you look all the way to the left on the very top dot there, that's what we call the control diet. So that's kind of like the standard American diet. Just switching from a standard American diet to a DASH diet, so if you follow that line straight down, you're just eating more vegetables, more fruits, more beans, more grains, even if it's at a high sodium level. So you can see that each of these diets has high, medium, and low sodium levels. So just switching to more plant-based foods can lower your blood pressure by about 8 points. And the reasons that happens is you're eating more magnesium, you're eating more potassium, you're eating more compounds in these plant-based foods which help to dilate your blood vessels, so nitrate-rich vegetables, and you're eating less things like oils and processed foods that constrict the vessels. So just, even if you eat a high sodium diet, you ate more plant foods, your blood pressure is going to come down. If in addition to that, if you follow the bottom line to the right, you lower the sodium, and they looked at different levels from 3.5 grams, which is what most Americans eat, down to just over 1,000 milligrams a day, you can lower the blood pressure another 5 points or so. So you can get about a 12-point reduction in blood pressure just by changing your diet. So I have a lot of patients that come and say, I don't want to be on blood pressure medicines. Well, this is a good place to start. And I hand out a sheet to almost all of my patients that talks about other lifestyle things you can do. Aerobic exercise, resistant exercise, stress management, better sleep. Each of these things can lower your blood pressure by 3 to 5 points. So if you really take an aggressive lifestyle approach, you can drop your blood pressure 20 points or more. So that's equivalent to a pretty good dose of a blood pressure medicine. What about cholesterol? If people hate one medicine or one class of medicines, it is the statin medicines. So I get more patients coming in with fear of taking statin medicines than anything else. So we oftentimes have a conversation, what can I do lifestyle-wise to bring my cholesterol down? So there's something called the portfolio diet, which was, again, a low-fat, plant-based diet. And this was done by an author named David Jenkins, and specifically he included foods that would help to lower cholesterol. Specifically, these were things, soy products, so they had to eat a certain amount of soy every day, nuts, and viscous fibers, and then plant sterols. So plant sterols are compounds of plants that help prevent the absorption of cholesterol. They come in very small amounts in most plant-based foods. You can, if you look at, there are some processed foods, granola bars, orange juices, things like that, that have plant sterols in them. But I like to have my patients avoid those, so they do come in a supplement form called cholesterol. So that combination of things, again, we can see can lower the cholesterol pretty significantly. So what they did in this study was that top line is just a low saturated fat diet. So people that went from the top dark line to the top light line on the right were on a low saturated fat diet, and their cholesterol dropped 5 to 10%. When they went on this portfolio diet, plant-based with a lot of these plant sterols, they dropped about 30%, which again is equivalent to a statin. So you can see that diet was equivalent to someone eating a low-fat diet or lovastatin, which is a low-potency statin. These were a couple more delicacies I made, some vegetarian tostadas and lasagna we had at a recent party at our house. All right, cardiovascular disease. So that's my specialty. So what is cardiovascular disease? So it's to make things simple, I like this graphic. It's basically when we have a lot of cholesterol floating around our blood, particularly if that's in the setting of inflammation and oxidation. So you hear a lot about antioxidants. So a lot of things are pro-oxidants, things, environmental exposure, smoking, foods that we eat. These can all cause inflammation and oxidation. This causes the bad or the LDL cholesterol to be more susceptible to getting into the walls of the blood vessel. I recently heard a lecture which I really liked how he described the blood vessel wall. It comes in layers, and the innermost layer is kind of like wallpaper on a wall. So it's a thin protective layer. When you get these oxidized LDLs, you get inflammation. It makes this inner wall, this wallpaper wall, very permeable. And this bad cholesterol actually gets behind the wallpaper and starts to grow larger and larger plaques. And that can lead to one of two things. It can lead to a plaque that eventually obstructs the blood vessel, or it can just rip right through the wallpaper and rupture right into the blood vessel wall, and that's when people have heart attacks. So our goal is to with lifestyle to see if we can reverse this process. Can we reverse some of these plaques? Can we reverse the chance that some of these things are going to rupture? We know that with the statin drugs we can do that. So when we look at some of the studies out there, and I'm going to go through some individual studies, but this is a larger population study which I'm going to reference a bit. It's called the Nurses' Health Study. So this was almost 90,000 nurses that many years ago took a survey, and they're followed year after year to see what they're doing in terms of diet and exercise, other health parameters, and we look and see what kind of medical conditions they have. So what they found in this large study was most coronary disease was related to those things that we talked about previously: smoking, obesity, lack of exercise, and lack of a healthy diet. And how they defined a healthier diet in this study was eating enough fiber, enough folate, which is prevalent in leafy green vegetables, as well as omega-3 fatty acids. They found also in the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study that just eating every serving of fruit and vegetables that you eat a day drops your risk of cardiovascular disease by 4%. So if you can eat 5, 6, 7, 8 servings of vegetable, that's a pretty good reduction.
Nice to see the sunshine.
Everyone's heard of the Mediterranean diet. So this is I think a good transition diet to really a full plant-based diet. The problem is a lot of people walked away with the wrong message from the Mediterranean diet. They walked away with the message that I need to have a lot of olive oil because olive oil is good for you. And I think that the olive oil companies did a great job of really marketing that. The real benefits of the Mediterranean diet don't come from the olive oil, they come from eating more plant-based foods. Now olives and polyunsaturated fatty acids, monounsaturated fatty acids, they do have a role, which I'm going to go over. But again, most of this had to do with eating more fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains. So this was a study where we saw that people that had heart attacks, about 400 people, and they were placed on the standard American Heart Association diet, which many people call low fat, even though it was a 30% fat diet, versus a Mediterranean diet, which again is more of those foods that we're encouraging people to eat. And they looked at events of different things: having heart attacks, having angina, heart failure, getting hospitalized. So if you look at this chart, it may be a little bit difficult to visualize here, but basically you're looking at the rate of events over the next few years. And people that were on the standard diet had an event rate of somewhere around 20 to 30%. People on the Mediterranean diet more in the range of 10%. So that was a pretty dramatic reduction, about 20% reduction in events by switching to a more plant-based diet. And these were people that had coronary disease, that had heart attacks. And the Mediterranean diet was also studied in a group that was felt to be at risk for having heart attacks but didn't yet have an event. So they probably have some of these plaques built up that haven't gotten to the point where they're causing symptoms or haven't gotten unstable enough to cause a heart attack. So can we improve outcomes in this population, prevent them from having those events occur? So once again, this was a larger study, about 5,000 people, and we saw that there was about a 30% reduction in events by switching to a Mediterranean diet compared to what we say is a standard American Heart Association diet. And this is where I was talking about the fats. So there have been studies, this was one published a few years ago, where it's very important to when we talk about low fat, it's important to classify what kinds of fats we're talking about. So first of all, I tell people most of these studies that show disease reversal, improvement disease, they're low fat diets. So trying to keep the diets less than 20% overall. But if you're eating fats, you want to make sure that you're eating the good fats, the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated fats. So what you see over on the colored bars there, anything that's on your left, on the top bar, they're looking at switching saturated fats to different things. The top one on the red is switching them to trans fats. So and we see that switching to something trans fats moves you to the right means you have a worse outcome, but moving to something like the green, the yellow, the blue, where you're moving it to, you're switching those calories to a healthier fat or to a whole grain, you'll have better outcomes. And the same thing on the bottom, we're trying to move, people say, well, carbs aren't good for you. If you move refined carbs to healthier fats, or you move refined carbs to healthier carbs, you actually live longer. So when we talk about carbs, and I get people all the time that are on keto diet, low carb diets, and we have to really define healthy carbs versus unhealthy carbs. So fiber is a component of carbohydrates, and as we mentioned, that's vitally important. So a couple other cardiovascular disease specific trials. Dr. Ornish, who's a pioneer in the field of lifestyle medicine, so he has these programs where you can actually go away, do these immersions where you're eating a healthy diet, you're doing stress management programs, meditation, yoga, regular exercise, smoking cessation. So if you're involved in one of his programs, he had a study called the Lifestyle Heart Trial, and his programs are actually covered by Medicare now because they've been found to be consistently successful. So if you look, this was one of the trials. It was about 50 people over 5 years, and he showed that you could actually reverse the plaques in the coronary artery. So I get this question all the time. Well, can I get rid of the plaque that's in there? I've had a stent, I have some other blockages, what can I do about it? So we know that the statin medicines help, but also lifestyle helps. So in his group here, this was patients that were actually not even on statin medicines, just going through his lifestyle program. He showed, and if you follow the orange dots down, the starting point was that the people had about a 41% narrowing of their vessel, and he brought that down to 37%. So it may not sound like a lot, but that's a roughly 8% reduction in plaque volume. And in the group that was really following standard advice, the Standard American Heart Association diet plans, they went up almost 30%. Their narrowing went up nearly 30%. So that's a pretty big change. And there were also reduced, so that's this kind of plaque behind the wall paper I talked about. So we showed that we can reduce the buildup of that. And then there were also fewer events, so fewer needs for stents and heart attacks, fewer episodes of angina, which means there was less of this plaque breaking through the walls and causing an acute event. As a benefit, people on the plant-based diet also lost almost 15 pounds, and their bad cholesterol dropped about 20%. So similar to what we saw in that portfolio diet. Dr. Esselstyn, many of you may have heard of him. He's another pioneer in this field. So he had really two studies. He had a study that took place 20, 30 years ago where he found the sickest of the sick people at the Cleveland Clinic. So he was a general surgeon that really got into plant-based dieting, and he saw the benefits of eating that way. So he took some of these people that were not really candidates to have stents or surgery, but were very symptomatic with their heart disease, their peripheral vascular disease, and he switched into basically almost a no-fat, not even any good plant-based fats. Switched them over to a plant-based diet, and he also showed that we were able to reduce the cardiovascular disease, so reduce plaque by about 7%. You can see he dropped their bad cholesterol in half, essentially, from 266 to 132. So when we talk about can we fix the cholesterol, can we fix plaque, can we fix coronary events, this study showed that in the sickest of the sick people, we were able to do all three of those. After this, he went on to do a randomized trial very similar to the one that was done by Dr. Ornish, just a little bit larger. It was 200 people. And one of the things I thought was neat about this study was he showed that, because a lot of people are fearful that they can't stick with the plant-based diet. So he showed that with this plan, almost 90% of people were able to stick with this plan over the 4 years he followed them. In those that followed the diet, there was almost a complete absence in those 4 years of any heart events. And in the people that dropped out, they had a 66 or 64% occurrence of events. So it's a pretty dramatic difference. So what are some of the mechanisms? We always talk about, well, you're eating less fat, you're eating less cholesterol, this is going to lower your cholesterol, but there are actually effects of eating animal protein that go beyond that. And I always like to share these things with my patients. So has anyone heard of TMAO? Some people? Yeah. Mike in the back's heard of TMAO. So that's something it's being a more recognized clinical marker for cardiovascular disease. So TMAO is actually a compound produced by our gut, all the bacteria in our gut that help us digest food. And it's very atherogenic, so it causes inflammation, it causes blood clotting, really leads to promotion of cardiovascular disease, cancer. So it only is produced when our gut bacteria digest animal proteins, specifically some of the choline and carnitine are some of the specific substances that are converted to TMAO. Those are found mostly in meat and eggs, some fish. So if you gave someone that's been vegan for 3, 4, 5 years meat, they don't even have these bacteria, so they won't produce any TMAO. But this is a very harmful compound, and a Cleveland Clinic recently came out with a test, so now we can test for TMAO. And more amazingly, they were in the process of developing an antibiotic that kills the bacteria that makes TMAO, instead of just having people try to eat healthier. So that's big pharma for you. So other things, eating a more plant-based diet helps our gut thrive. So eating fiber helps to grow the good, healthy bacteria in our gut. If we have unhealthy guts, we can develop something called the leaky gut syndrome. So our gut is supposed to be a barrier between what we eat, what we digest, and our bloodstream. We're supposed to be able to absorb the good nutrients, but not all the toxic things. If you have leaky gut, some of these endotoxins start leaking into your blood and are really felt to be responsible for a lot of the inflammation that underlies many of our chronic diseases: autoimmune disease, cancer, coronary disease, diabetes. Advanced glycation end products. This is something that, these are things like, big words, heterocyclic amines, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. These are compounds that are formed when we cook meat, particularly if you're cooking them over high heat for long periods of time, and if they're cooked in a dry environment. So things like grilling, sauteing, baking, broiling. And it's a reaction that happens when sugars, carbohydrates in food react with the proteins in food. So much like TMAO, these are also highly atherogenic. Now these can also be found in some plant-based foods, particularly if things like nuts, if you cook them at high heat, but they're not found in nearly the same level as they are in something like bacon. Okay, so that's going to be one of your worst offenders. And then heme iron is one of these other substances. So the iron that is found in meat versus the iron in plant foods, it's much more readily absorbed. Those levels can build up. And just like these other compounds, high levels of heme iron intake have been found to be associated with many of these same chronic diseases. So when I talk to people and they say, well, listen, I'm not eating red meat, I'm just eating white meat chicken, I'm just eating eggs, you know, they can all contribute to these other toxic compounds. And even if it doesn't, even if you're taking a statin, your cholesterol's good, these are other mechanisms, other pathways by which consumption of these foods can lead to chronic disease. All right, diabetes. So diabetes is rampant in our country and around the world and just growing. So right now, it's estimated about 30 to 35 million people have diabetes, and almost 90 million have prediabetes. And it's all part of the same process. They're kind of these random cut points to where we say, well, you have diabetes or prediabetes, but it's really the same process that's going on. So how many people think that diabetes is a sugar problem? And no one's raising their hand because you know that I'm going to tell you it's not a sugar problem. It's not a carbohydrate problem. Okay, so that's the first thing that I get from patients, and it's really about re-educating people about what causes diabetes. So really, you can see this chart I have on here. There's a complex interplay of many different things which cause diabetes. But the base of it is when people eat too much fat, too much saturated fat, mostly which comes from animal proteins, processed foods, you start to get fat deposits in your muscle, in your liver, in your pancreas. When you get fat deposits in the muscle, your muscle it's not able to take up the glucose, the sugars that are in your blood. So if you have insulin resistance, you have fat buildup in your muscle already, you go to eat a carbohydrate, even an apple, your blood sugars are going to go up. But that's not because you're eating carbohydrates. Your blood sugars are going up because you have an underlying problem. In addition to the fat getting in the muscle, when it gets into the liver, that starts to cause fatty liver, which is really the most common cause of liver disease in our country. And the liver becomes dysfunctional. It starts making sugar, putting more sugar into the blood when it shouldn't be putting sugar into the blood. The fat getting into the pancreas causes the pancreas not to work. So when you need insulin, the pancreas can't produce insulin anymore. All of these processes lead to a lot of inflammation. And the inflammatory process worsens the diabetes. We also talked about the microbiome. So for people that are not eating enough plants, you lose the gut bacteria that thrive on fiber. And these gut bacteria produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids, which help to reduce diabetes. So there's a lot of different areas which we can attack diabetes, but it's not by cutting out carbohydrates. So not eating refined carbohydrates, that's fine. Don't eat white sugar, don't eat white flour, try to stick with whole grains, but carbohydrates are your friend. And there's a great book by Dr. Barnard. It's called Reversing Diabetes, if anyone out there has diabetes, and he kind of goes through this process in depth. And there's a group called Mastering Diabetes, which they have a great website. And these guys eat a very low-fat diet, almost completely just fruits and vegetables. They eat about 700 to 800 carbohydrates a day. And they've essentially completely reversed their diabetes. So that can happen. So if you're interested, if you're diabetic, if you're interested, you have a friend that's diabetic, check that website out, or the book. So once again, going back to the Nurses' Health Study, same factors that cause heart disease are associated with diabetes. Overweight, tobacco, poor diet, lack of physical activity. When we talk about just red meat, so there are several studies done. These are large population studies. The Nurses' Health Study, the Adventist Health Study, and the EPIC study. all of these showed a significant increase in risk of diabetes by the more meat you eat, the greater your chance of having diabetes. So if you look at this EPIC study, which is a population study done in Europe, every 5% of calories from animal protein leads to a 30% increase in diabetes. Or this Adventist health study basically showed a doubling of diabetes in those who ate meat versus those who didn't eat meat at all. There's a study called the Diabetes Prevention Program. So this is one that I share with a lot of my patients. This was about 3,000 people that were enrolled in this. They basically looked at 3 groups. We're going to give you the standard American diabetic diet recommendations and kind of the standard counseling you'd expect from your primary care physician. We're going to do that and add metformin, which is really a first-line diabetes medication. Or we're just going to work with your lifestyle. We're going to make sure you exercise 150 minutes a week and try to lose weight. So their goal was to lose about 7% of their weight. And what did they find? So if you look at the top line, the blue line, the placebo group had the highest incidence of diabetes, whereas lifestyle was actually better than metformin or placebo. So you had about a 60% reduction by lifestyle compared with the standard recommendations in terms of developing diabetes. So yes, we can have a significant reduction in people who are pre-diabetic and reducing their chance of getting diabetes, more so than we see with the first-line medication, metformin. And this is Dr. Bernard's book, if anyone wants to take a screenshot of that, if you're interested. So he did a study where he looked at placing people on a vegan diet. This was about a 6-month study versus the standard American Diabetes Association diet. And the goal was to try to get them off their medications and see how much their hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of blood sugars kind of averaged over 3 months, how much that dropped. So in the vegan group, almost 50% were able to reduce their medicines versus only a quarter in people in the standard American Diabetes Association group. The hemoglobin A1C dropped over a full percentage point, which is equivalent to a high dose of 1 medicine or a lower dose of 2 medicines. A pretty impressive number. And in the standard group, you could see that it was about 4 times less that the hemoglobin A1C dropped. They lost also about 15 pounds, and the bad cholesterol dropped 20%. So this was a common theme that we've seen in almost all of these trials, that people are going to lose weight, usually in the range of about 15 to 20 pounds. Their bad cholesterol is going to drop in the range of 20 to 30%. And this was the final diabetes studies, which showed that we could cause diabetes, again, to reverse. So just like we showed one study which showed we can prevent progression from pre-diabetes to diabetes. This is another one that shows that we can actually reverse diabetes. So this was 150 people trying to switch them to more of a plant-based diet. You can see that this was a more aggressive diet where the goal, they were given a diet that consisted just of 850 calories and transitioned to more of a plant-based diet, regular plant-based eating following that. And what they showed was, if you look all the way to the left, there was about a 46% remission at 1 year in diabetes. So just by calorie restriction and reintroducing a healthy plant-based diet, 46%. If you look all the way to the right, you can see that the standard American Diabetes Association recommendation, there's only a 2% remission in diabetes. That's a pretty big difference. And the other impressive number on here is, as people lost more weight, they had a greater remission of diabetes. So if you look at the tallest bar there, that was people that lost 15 kilograms, so a little over 30 pounds. There was an 86% remission in diabetes. And you could see that that number goes down as less weight was lost, but even in the lower groups there, they were all better than the American Diabetes Association plan. Oh, I think these 2 slides got messed up, so I'll go back to that. Some of the mechanisms we've talked about already. So optimizing the gut microbiome. By having a plant-based diet, you make your beta cells in your pancreas more healthy from some of the reasons. So we reduce inflammation, we reduce high sugars, we reduce high cholesterol. All of these things lead to a damaged pancreas. So by eating a plant-based diet, we reverse these processes and keep the pancreas healthy. And then also, we talked about the fat deposition in the muscle and the liver and the pancreas. We are able to reverse this process. So it has to do with inflammation, improving the microbiome, and improving where fat's going to be stored. All right, then the last part is cancer. So we've talked about high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and now cancer. So many people think that they're destined to have cancer. They have a strong family history of cancer. Maybe they've had some other risk factors for cancer. the genes are not your destiny, and that's one of the principles they teach us with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. There's a whole field now called Epigenetics, which shows that with lifestyle factors, we can actually turn on and off various genes. And there are several studies now to show that we can document that we can change specific genes and that we can improve outcomes in cancer, specifically developing cancer or being able to treat cancer with food and with lifestyle in general. So I put this up here. These are two of the most common kinds of cancer, prostate cancer and breast cancer. Most of the studies that have been done look at prostate cancer, breast cancer, and colon cancer. I have to skip past this out of order slide. My apologies. All right, so many of my patients that have coronary disease also have prostate cancer. So I see a population of men in their 60s to 80s where prostate cancer is very common, and it's usually a very difficult decision. There's a lot of treatment options for prostate cancer, and can be an emotionally challenging decision for a lot of patients, and they get different opinions from everyone. So they've looked at two trials. Dr. Ornish had a couple of these unique trials here, where he looked specifically at how his lifestyle program, which we talked about previously, could affect prostate cancer. So specifically, this trial was about 100 people. He looked at people who decided that their PSA levels were a little bit elevated, and they made the decision not to have surgery, not to have radiation, not to have chemotherapy, not to have hormone therapy, but just to kind of watch and see where things went. So he took that group, it was just going to be under general surveillance, and took another group and put them on a low-fat vegan diet, supplemented with soy, supplemented with omega-3 fatty acids, regular exercise, stress management. And what did he find? So if you look at the left here, the starting PSA levels were about the same, 6.2 to 6.3. In the group that followed his program versus the active surveillance group, the PSAs went down to 5.9, and another group went up to 6.7. So that means that the prostate cancer was progressing in the active surveillance group and actually was reversing in the lifestyle intervention group. And I think even more impressive than that, he took the serum of these patients and in a petri dish wanted to see how this would affect prostate cancer cells. And he saw that there was a nearly 80% inhibition of prostate cancer cell growth in people that were on the lifestyle group, and only about 10% in the surveillance group. So the blood was very good at preventing further prostate cell cancer growth. And this was one of the studies that looked at the epigenetics. So this was a really unique trial. It was a small trial of 30 men. Basically, he did the same lifestyle intervention program, but he took samples of the prostate for the same men undergoing surveillance that had low-grade prostate cancer, and he looked at the DNA, and DNA produces something called RNA, which eventually leads to some of the cancer proteins. So he saw that we could turn on and off specific genes. He looked at over 500 genes here. So this was just an example of the genes that he looked at were on the right. In each column, although you can't really see it, was a different patient. So there were like 30 patients and maybe 30 genes here. So the red were all genes that were turned on, and following the lifestyle intervention, they all became green, meaning he was able to actually turn these genes off. And when they investigated this further to see exactly what those genes do, they don't know what all of them do, but they found that many of the ones that they turned off were in part responsible for promotion of cancer, and some of the ones that they turned on helped to fight the cancer. So again, the small study and certainly warrants larger studies to confirm this principle, but it's great initial information. And then breast cancer. This is one, there's also a lot of confusion, oftentimes a lot of choices regarding what's the right thing to do. A lot of confusion about soy. So there was once this theory that soy, and some people still believe this, that soy, you really should avoid it because it has estrogen-like properties, and estrogen can cause breast cancer to grow, particularly estrogen-sensitive breast cancer. But there are actually 6 or 7 pretty large trials where they looked at consumption of soy and actually preventing development of breast cancer initially, or actually helping to cure breast cancer. So, or at least a recurrence. So maybe people that have been treated for breast cancer, we see that you can have a much lower rate of recurrence. So I won't go through each of these trials, but these are 3 of the larger studies that showed that you can reduce death from breast cancer, reduce the development of breast cancer, and actually prevent recurrence of breast cancer in those that have been treated.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, no worries.
So a lot of the same mechanisms we talked about for cardiovascular disease and diabetes, a plant-based diet really helps to reduce inflammation and improve the gut microbiome, reduce growth factors, which also plays a role in diabetes. So something called insulin-like growth factor 1, which is very cancer promoting. The antioxidant effect. So we talked about all the oxidation that we're exposed to day to day. That can affect our DNA, and as that DNA replicates, those become cancers. So a plant-based diet can affect all these, as well as turn on and off our genes. And I'd like, when we talk about the plant-based diet in general, one of the principles I mentioned early on was eating the color spectrum. And why is that? All of the different foods have specific chemicals, phytochemicals, phytonutrients that have different properties. And many of those these are not defined. So when people come in and say, well, I'm taking resveratrol or I'm taking vitamin E, there's so many millions of compounds that are unnamed that really work together. It's like if you have a symphony and you say, well, I'm just going to take the first chair violin, but you're not taking everything else. They work best together. So that's why we really encourage people to eat whole foods, a whole food package, and just the whole color spectrum of foods. And you can see that all the different colors offer different beneficial antioxidants. So that, I tried to keep it as short and sweet as possible, but I hope that everyone will walk away knowing that, if you have an opportunity to talk to your physician, if you have any of these chronic diseases, if you have friends or family, that there are things that you can do lifestyle-wise that can help improve these. And like I said, if you wanted to stop by our booth later, one of the purposes of our lifestyle center is to help people transition. So as a cardiologist now, I can only see someone every 3 months, every 6 months. We really can't reinforce these principles, keep an eye on what people are eating week to week, month to month. We can't keep an eye to make sure that they're exercising. So we're gonna have nutritional counseling, we're gonna have fitness counseling, we're gonna have a demo kitchen, we're gonna teach people how to prepare affordable, healthy, easy to make foods. So I encourage you to stop by. We have some pamphlets, and I'm happy to answer any questions before they kick me off. It was very
Does
thorough.
anyone have a question for Brian Taschner?
Here's one right here.
You were talking about carnitine in meat and how it can promote cancer, turned into cancer compounds by the microbiome. So is that hold true for carnitine supplement?
Yeah, so it is felt to be carnitine is one of the main, so the answer is yes. I don't think that there's been as much research done, but that's one of the things that they've looked at is carnitine and choline in general, even in supplement form. Once the gut microbiome, those are the two primary compounds that they transform into the TMA, which is that's transformed to TMAO in your liver, and that's the atherogenic compound. So in general, and even in, it's mostly in animal-based foods. So fish, some of the fish have higher levels, but the main culprits are red meat and eggs. But it is in supplements as well. Oh, you had a question?
Yes, I've read that dairy products have a negative impact on prostate and create more likelihood of cancer.
Right.
Is that true?
Yeah, so there are studies which show a higher association of prostate cancer development with higher dairy consumption. And with the other, I had this discussion with somebody yesterday, so I can't quote you the studies, but that is actually well documented. In addition, in our country, we have a lot of dairy to prevent osteoporosis and bone fractures. When you actually look at the countries that consume the most dairy, there is the highest incidence of bone fractures and osteoporosis. And part of that is because dairy tends to acidify the blood, and we have to take the calcium out of the bones to help buffer that. So there's great plant-based sources of calcium, leafy greens. You have to watch out for ones that are higher in oxalate, like spinach, beet greens. Just because some of the nutrients like the iron and calcium, they are not as well absorbed. But yet you can get all of your calcium from beans, from nuts and seeds, from green vegetables, and try to avoid dairy. And then there's a lot of the nut milks that are supplemented with calcium as well, and tofu. Yes?
Well, we have a high amount of breast cancer in this country, and they say definitely it is
So that one you have in February, I was there last year. This year, it's on President's Weekend. It's a 3-day weekend. Yeah, and I'm thinking you're going to be slammed because that's like one of, I'm in a restaurant business too, so it's going to be like the busiest weekend for restaurants.
Yeah, that's a good. So that's something I had not heard before, but it's definitely if you're eating.
You might leave town, you might be.
Right, so if you're not having iodized salt, you know, they do sell supplements now, like kelp supplements, which I think are a great source of iodine. So I try to take that a couple times a week. Yep.
Oh, really?
Yep, to make sure you get your iodine supplements. All right.
What's the form?
Yeah. Well, thank you all for your attention, and enjoy. Get some great food. Thank you.